بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. What Sidi Amjad mentioned was very pertinent, and for me, one of the most powerful metaphors for the time that we live in, and for the age of doubt, is a very tragic 20th century novelist. My wife and I have a long-standing difference of opinion about the utility of literature, and I'm a firm believer in it. And it's David Foster Wallace, known to nerds as DFW. Anyone read David Foster Wallace? Okay. Well, that's tragic in itself. No, for no other reason, he's thoroughly interesting writer, but a very troubled writer at many levels. And he's very interesting because he was a very thoughtful person, and he, besides writing some really difficult to read novels, he was a brilliant essayist. And Harper's Magazine sent him off on a boat cruise. And you could, if you Google it, I have a request. I was going to make a recommended reading package for you guys. What I'll do, because there's enough nerds here, if someone could volunteer to compile a list on this, we'll put it on the Seekers Hub blog afterwards. So yeah, I'll trust you guys will do that. So he was sent on this boat cruise, and he wrote this fascinating essay called Something Supposedly Fun or Supposedly Interesting That I'll Never Do Again. Now this boat cruise and everyone's like, it's all happy and joy, but it was like so profoundly meaningless. And this is something that really troubled him. He wrote this big, fat novel. It's one of those things that if you have a troubled marriage relationship, don't keep it too close to the bed, because you may be hit by it, because it's a brick. It's one of the, without doubt, one of the great novels of the 20th century, called Infinite Jest. And really, even if you don't read the book, there's an Italian literary critic who has, I think he's Italian, he has this book called How to Talk About Books That You Haven't Read. And the Italians are, a curious bunch, because they think of some pretty curious things. Like Umberto Eco came up with this argument about in praise of ugliness, right? Because beauty, he said, is boring, because beauty is everything being right. That's boring. What's really interesting is ugliness. Now, if you do, and he gave it as a lecture, just listen to it, don't watch it, because I was actually working on my computer. I have two screens. The video was playing on the other screen, and of course I'm error prone. My wife walks in right when you're showing examples of ugliness. But thank God my wife's a patient person who has good opinion of people, so I didn't get in too much trouble at least. So he wrote this amazing novel called Infinite Jest. But the whole premise of it is that what are people up to, right? Like all of it, like this one big absurdity, right? Like this people. There has to be some meaning to this. And he had a big struggle with this. One thing that I would recommend that you read, he gave, very often commencement speeches are very, cliched. But one of the most brilliant commencement speeches ever given was given by David Foster Wallace. It's called This Is Water. And it's hilarious. It was turned into an overpriced book. But it's worth it if but the whole speech was like 20 minutes, but brilliant. You can find it online. If you go to Brain Pickings, you'll find it. Like, This Is Water, David Foster Wallace, you'll find it. And you'll find his commencement speech there too. But it's brilliant. But that there has to be meaning to all of this. Otherwise, life doesn't make sense, right? Because logically, if life doesn't make any sense, right? If you just abstract everything, forget all conventions, if there's no meaning to life, then you're a whole bunch of idiots. Right? Why? Because you shouldn't be here. You should either be completely depressed or you should party till you die. Right? 'Cause there's no meaning to life and life is finite. And then you should be totally miserable. Right? You should really go commit suicide, right? If purely, right? Like, there's no meaning to it, then why live it? Just go. Or party till you pop, right? And some people can't decide which extreme to go to, right? So they try to do both at the same time and commit to neither. But it's very troubling, which is why, of course, very interestingly, pretty much all the post-Enlightenment philosophers led the most miserable lives, right? If you read the biographies of all the Enlightenment philosophers, it's a litany of misery. This guy committed suicide, this guy died on the toilet, this guy, it's like amazing. Ended up in the insane asylum, and I'm not making it up, with all due respect to their intellectual brilliance otherwise. Right? It is deeply troubling. But then, if we leave that aside for a moment, Ustad Amjad closed with the right thing, that the answer is Allah. But that's true. But it's like if you've read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's a question, if love is the answer, then could you please restate the question? Right? So if the answer is Allah, what is the question? Right? What is the question? Right? And that's a real important thing that we should think through as believers. Because as a believer, you believe, by definition. Right? Do you believe? Yes, I do. Theologically, it's enough for you to believe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful. You don't have to know why. You believe it, it's enough. But particularly in an age of doubt, where a lot of people don't believe, right? The prevalent intellectual climate is one of disbelief. Right? Secularism and the implicit irrelevance of religion is in the water. It's in the air that we breathe. Right? So if you go through life not knowing why you believe, at some point that will be tested. And it's a very dangerous place to be in. It's enough, but that is brittle and fragile. The theologians differed. Some of the Muslim theologians said that it is not sufficient simply to believe the truth, but you have to know why. Because otherwise, logically, why should you believe it? If you don't know why it's true, why should you believe it? And what's the basis of it? But that's a long argument, but the answer was no, it is sufficient to believe as long as you have, that belief is firm. And that's called taqleed. But it is dangerous. It is dangerous. You wanted to ask a few questions. The first question to ask is, what is belief? What is belief? What is iman? What is iman? And it's not a rhetorical question, it's a real question. Now, some of you, if you don't know it, like when I was hitting 40, I had a bit of a crisis of, not crisis, but I imagined having a life crisis preemptively, right, a few years early. So I opened a Twitter account to address it called Uncle Rabbani. Uncle Rabbani is me, but it's not me myself. It is me, my imagined other, the grumpy uncle. And he says some wise follies, right? But I'd hit you. Like if you don't know that what is belief, I'd hit you if some of you don't know it. But what is belief? Okay, faith is what is in the heart and is confirmed by action. That's true, but why? Why is it in the heart? Because I could believe in the encompassing pineapple, and I live for that. So that is true. That is true. Right? That faith is something that rests in the heart and is confirmed by action. So that's true, but what is faith itself? what is belief itself? And there's, philosophers and theologians go into differences between faith and belief, but let's not be too picky about it right now. What does it mean to believe in something?
To have confidence and trust in something?
Yes, to have confidence in something, to have trust in something. Go ahead. Evidence? No, that's why you believe. It's not belief itself. Right? And belief doesn't necessarily have to be rational. Right? There was a period of time, although it's changed arguably a bit, but not clearly. I don't follow soccer, but I grew up just down the road from the Santiago Bernabeu, the Real Madrid's great and glorious stadium. So, and of course, as a Muslim, it's they're the real. Real, they're the real. Well, they're actually royal, but right. So if they're real, then Barcelona is false, right? So there's a period of time I believed that the best team in the world is Real Madrid, although evidence would indicate to the contrary. But I believed, right? I had no proof for it. Now it's more arguable. Well, arguably. Anyways, what is belief? Is what you think is right. Okay. So, and these are good definitions, right? Formally, they say, وَفُسِّرَ الْإِيمَانُ بِالتَّصْدِيقِ in Jawharat al-Tawheed, which is one of the great summaries of Islamic belief. Imam Ibrahim al-Laqani said, Iman, belief, is explained as being confirmation, is to confirm something as being true. Meaning with conviction and acceptance of that truth. Right? So if you know something, but it's not just knowledge. Like if you asked me a few years ago, like right now I'd say, if I was honest, I'd say fi shak. I'm in doubt, which is a better team, right? But a few years ago, in the age of Guardiola, right, there's no doubt which was a better team. But, so, that's knowledge. But do I believe it? No. Right? So I was in a state of kufr, of disbelief. Because I knew that Barcelona is a better team, but I didn't believe it. Because I didn't confirm it, I wasn't convinced about it, or if I was, but I didn't accept that. Okay? So, that is belief. Belief is confirming something is true. You could say that more clearly about other things, but that's an example of belief and disbelief, right? That's belief. You confirm something is true. Of course, there's true belief, which is what if you're convinced something is true and it actually is. That is sound belief. And you could be convinced that something is true, but it not be true. Right? So belief, there's belief itself, right? And sometimes people argue for the benefits of belief. That's good, but there's another question. Then why should you believe this as opposed to any one of other beliefs? Right? Which is when a question arises. That, one of the big things that everyone is around us is talking about, and there's a whole intellectual gang, it's really a gang, the new atheists who've really promoting it, that no, we don't believe in God. So the question does arise that are the atheists right when they deny belief in God? Are the atheists right? Right? So that's an honest question. Are the atheists right? Of course, one thing, if you're smart, never answer an absolute question absolutely. Right? Never answer an absolute question absolutely, because there's almost always an exception. So, but you raised your hand already, so I'll pick on you anyways. What?
No, but it depends on what they mean by God, I guess.
So are they right? No. Well, you couch it. Okay. Anyone else want to? Go ahead.
They're not right because you can't prove the negative.
Yeah, that's a separate aspect, right? That you can't prove an making such an absolute negation, right, is one of the most difficult things to do rationally, right? And then, but here, and I won't be as rigorous as needed, but we would agree at one level. As believers, we are in full agreement with the atheists at one point, okay? Which is we do affirm La ilaha. Okay? We do affirm the first part, what they affirm as the first part of our belief, okay? Which is La ilaha. There is no God. Right? We affirm that. Right? There is no God. Illallah, except God, right? Except the one true God. Right? Of course, another way of putting that, I was in a small mosque in northern England, and it's a part of England that doesn't feel like England, at least in parts of it. I was in Preston, and this masjid had this sign that had the testification of faith, La ilaha illallah. Underneath it had the translation. It says, there is no God, and if we have to say it with an Indian accent, there is no God, only Allah. Right? And that was just a bad, awkward translation, but there's a point. Right? That all the conceptions of God that others have, we don't accept them. I mean, how we don't accept it is a separate matter, right? That we accept the premise of a supreme being, etc., etc. So insofar as that's what they're talking about, we agree with them when they affirm belief in God. So we agree with Christians and Jews and others who affirm belief in God. We say we agree with you. But at another level, all the things that people accept as God, we don't accept any of it at the level that all of those realities ultimately, as conceived, are unsound. None of those conceptions of God could exist as conceived. Right? We would say, as Muslims, that don't go and argue with people in this way, but theologically we would affirm that what is the rational ruling of the Christian belief in God? The Christian belief in God is mustahil aqlan. It's rationally absurd. It's rationally impossible. Now, of course, we wouldn't approach it that way. There's another way of looking at it, that they affirm a supreme being. We agree with that. So we both say we believe in one God, and we do. Right? But that conception of God, taken in its entirety, we say that God could not exist. And likewise with other understandings. But of course, our religion is one of balance. So even with Hindus, we would say we agree with you in the existence of a supreme being. So at that level, we agree with you. They affirm ultimately in a supreme being who is the originator of all reality. So we would share that. And the way you approach others is through commonality. Right? And that's important. But and we see with two eyes, right? So that's at one level. But theologically, we say all these conceptions of God are not sound, right? And that's important. Why? Because we are surrounded with all kinds of ideas about God that trouble people who think, and very often cause them not to accept those ideas. And even as Muslims, sometimes the way we are troubled by what we see ascribed about God, or how God is conceived of, even within the house of Islam, and people are troubled. But what they're rejecting is not God as God, but God as conceived of or as portrayed. And people have very troubled relations with God. I was at a particular, at another faith's seminary, and one of the religious leaders said their theological specialization is in God as monster. Right? And right? And it's actually a very thoughtful person, but their conception of God was itself troubled. So we would separate. We agree with you in affirming God, but the way you are conceiving of God, we would say we disbelieve, right? So this is important, right? This is important, that it is not irrational. Like some people say the atheists are just dumb. And they may be dumb in one way. They're a bunch of thugs, unfortunately, right? And they're much more rigorous critiques of religion, even in Western thought. But it's not completely baseless. What they are attacking, right, is not completely baseless. It's like someone came when I was at the University of Toronto, maybe before Said Amjad was born, or not quite, but feels like it. We used to have these MSA tables, right? They used to call them da'wah tables, but they're really MSA tables, right? So we used to, Muslim Student Association. And there's this one guy and there used to be different kinds of people who used to come and to debate us, to argue. Amongst them, there's some Irani students jaded by the revolution. They used to say, what do you believe about the Ayatollah? So we had a standard answer: we don't believe in the Ayatollah, we believe in God. And we just stumped them, okay? Because they wanted to fight. Yeah, so this one person said, I don't believe in God. So we had this Egyptian graduate student. He looked at him and said, I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in. And the person, he spoke with a much heavier accent. So basically he said, I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in, but I believe in a God that you know nothing about. So what do you mean? He said, sit down. And they had a good conversation. A few weeks later, the guy was a Muslim. So this is a very important aspect, right? Very important aspect, that who is God? Right? Who is God? Right? Who is Allah? Right? And this is very important for us at various levels. One is that when we talk about Islam, right? Firstly, you could make a very strong argument we should talk much less about Islam, right? Because, human beings have been created tribal. And very often, you imagine that there's a tribe called Islam, right? Right? And its identity is Muslim, right? But Islam is not a tribe. Islam is submission to God, right? And the point is, Allah, it's not... Islam is the means. The means is necessary, but not sufficient. The means is necessary, but not sufficient. But without the end to which it is a means, it is irrelevant. Right? So this is very important, because we do bad when we talk about our faith. We always end up talking about Islam, and it makes no sense whatsoever. Makes no sense whatsoever. I was on a train journey from a very traumatic experience on the east coast of the US, headed to New York City, one of my favorite non-sacred places on earth. And on the train, this Irish lady came, much older, like in her 50s, 60s, said, sir, would you mind are you Muslim? I said, yes. I said, do you mind if I sit next to you? I said, go ahead. And I was actually worried, because she was a bit loud, and I was just fearing more trauma to the trauma I had in the 3 days I was in this particular small town in Connecticut. She says, can I ask you some questions? And she asked that, I've been reading about Islam. She says, do you guys really wake up before dawn? I said, yes. She said, that's tough. And she actually went to a convent school or whatever. So you guys really pray 5 times a day? I said, yes. Do you guys really do this? Yeah. And I wanted to steer the conversation, but it makes no, what crazy person would do all these things? Get up before dawn, and do this, go hungry a whole month, right? So what do Muslims do? They believe in some alien sounding thing, Allah, and then after that, they and the person they kill all these people on behalf of, because of these cartoons, but you don't mention who is Allah or Allah and who is this person. And then you pray all day. You go hungry a whole month. And you give away money. Who do they give it to? Right? No, seriously, it sounds scary. They give away their money. It must be this thing that's funding those extremists. Right? And they go to the Middle East once in a lifetime. Right? For Hajj. Right? That sounds really freaky. And practically, it's terrible advertising. Right? It's terrible. If you want to convince people of what you believe in, this is not the way. Why? Because none of these make any sense whatsoever unless they have a purpose. What's the purpose? Allah. Is that belief in God. Right? And the call is to that. But we ourselves need to gain much more clarity about whom it is that we believe in. Because our belief in God is a clear, established belief. There is no understanding of God that is as clear as what the Quranic truth has come with. Right? It's not just something that we accept. Why are we Muslim? Because my dad is Muslim. Or my mom is Muslim. Right? It's not just... So God is not simply the one who's accepted for worship. That there's some people who believe in a certain deity or a certain conception of the real, and we happen to believe in Allah. Right? But rather, the only point of believing, the only point of worshipping, the only point of submitting, the only point of obedience is that there underlies it a truth claim. The only point of belief, otherwise you're a fool. If you believe in something, but not because it is true, right? Might as well believe in the great bowl of floating spaghetti or something, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. And if you don't know why you believe, then it's just as in itself, it is just as probable that to believe in a floating bowl of spaghetti, except that you just happen to be believing that which is true, right? But what is the basis of that? And this is very important. This is very important. That while we can say that, yes, we believe in God, we believe in Allah. Why? Because this is true. But what is the basis of that truth? Right? How do we know that what we believe in is true? One of the greatest blessings of Allah, one of the greatest blessings of God upon His creation is that we've been created with, we think very little. قَلِيلًا مَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Little it is that you think, little it is that you reflect. One of the greatest mercies of Allah is being heedless, unaware, unthinking. Because if most people began thinking a little more, if depression rates are alarming, a lot more people in general would be depressed. Suicide rates would go up. Muslims would stop believing. Why? Because you ask them, why do you believe? I don't know. So why are you believing? I don't know. Good question. If they started thinking in that direction, it would make sense. If you don't know why you believe, why believe it? Right? So, while we say without hesitation or doubt, right, that this is the truth, you have to know why it is the case. You have to know why it is the case. Why? Because faith through mere acceptance of truth is salvifically accepted. It is sufficient with God. But it is brittle and fragile and susceptible to being shaken, susceptible to doubts. And it's like, one of the other great novels of the 20th century, Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. I'm a big fan of South Africa. Talks about that behind the windowsill, the woodworms are eating away. That very often there are these latent doubts that people have. Sometimes, much of what's happening in your consciousness, you are unconscious of. So you have these doubts. You hear things. you listen to things, you experience things, and there's doubts. They don't occur to you in your active consciousness, but they're there. And if you study about neuroscience and consciousness, it's a reality, even according to science. But spiritually, it troubles you, and you may not know why. Why? Because you don't know why you believe. So what happens? It is eroding away at your faith until something comes that flips it. And it may seem like a totally irrelevant event. You went to the masjid and someone slammed the door on you. And maybe they didn't slam the door on you. Maybe it's just one of those awkward mosque doors that it's kind of hard to operate. So you just went, and that time they loosened the thing before it was really tight. So you had to push before, now you didn't, and you slammed it in someone's face. It's probably just someone like me, just clumsy in life. Say, look, they slammed the door on me. Says, I'm not Muslim anymore. And they walk away. And of course, that's a bit of a dramatization, but these things happen all the time. Like, how does that make sense? It's not that breaking event itself, it's that there's a lot going on under the surface. And underlying it, there's many reasons, and we'll look at those in the next session, but underlying it is that you had no support for what you believed in the first place. Right? You had no support for what you believed in the first place. And we would contend that in our times, while we say with complete certitude that this is the truth, capital T, right? Because truth exists, truth is knowable, and their means of verifying it, mere acceptance is a very weak way of adhering to the truth. So what are the pathways to truth? At one level, right, and this is one of the more confounding ways, right? This is a sound way, but it has many things going against it. And I didn't believe this when I was studying theology, and I disliked several of my teachers for saying this, including some of my theology teachers in Damascus. One way of proving the truth claim of our faith is rational proofs. But there's several issues against it. One is that people do not think using reason. Typically. Like, we're not in an age of reason. Right? And we don't want to go into it too much, but science is not rational, right? Science is not based on reason. So the rational proofs for the existence of God don't appeal to a mind infatuated by science, right? Because a rational proof is distinct from a proof from science, right? Through observation, right? So there's rational proofs from how creation points to the creator, how the originated requires an originator, right? How change is a proof for an originator to the universe, etc. There's these rational proofs, and they're sound, but they're not sufficient, right? There's not sufficient, and there's other issues with that, and there's a very useful article by Shaykh Nuh Keller called Kalam and Islam, and make a note of that. That's one of the things that it's worth reading about, that these proofs are sound and they're worth studying, but they don't address the emptiness within the heart, right? They're not particularly inspiring, and you can always ask for further proof. Because the basis of a rational proof are, and to avoid technical language, you say A and B, therefore C. And the problem with that is that you say, prove B. So you say C and D, or you say D and E, therefore B is true. So you say, okay, prove to me E. And just keep going. And until you can exert some, and if you're really, like what they say in Urdu, بغيرت بشرم, if you're completely shameless, right, and not intimidated, you can keep asking. And the poor theologian will be stuck having to prove every premise that they make. Define this, prove it, and you're stuck. Right? So they're rational proofs. And the Quran points to them, but this is one angle. Right? But there's also another problem. Right? There's a number of issues. Not that they're not sound, but that's not, the human being is not merely a body and a mind. That's not what makes you a human being. So there remains an emptiness to that. The second way that we, and this is, this is really building on sound reason. Really, we'd say the most powerful proofs for the truth claim of what we believe in is the Quran. And the third thing that the third aspect that I'll mention is the Quran. Like we had our annual benefit dinner. We had Azhar Usman come, who's, if you were there, Azhar is the intellectual comedian, right? Once in a while, I'll catch him giving an interview somewhere. So, we're old friends. I say, well said, Mullah Azhar, right? Because he's a thinking man, right? It's, the truth claim of the Quran is something we can stand behind, absolutely. So, if you tell someone that this is a book that's 1400 years old, and it's preserved exactly, word for word, letter for letter, exactly as when it appeared, at least give some attention to it. What is it? And how was it preserved? And that there are hundreds of thousands of people around the world, if not millions, who memorize it now. What other book? It's like it's a 600-page book, or however many pages the Quran is, depending. I'm really bad with numbers. Don't take that as a reference, right? And all these kids memorize it. Nothing unique. So at least you should consider what is it all about, anyways, right? And the Quran makes a very bold truth claim that you cannot produce not just the like of it, or the like of a chapter of it, or even a few verses of it. Right? It is inimitable. Right? Not at many levels, in its eloquence, in its guidance, in its truth. Right? And this is something that, if you're thinking about why believe, this is an important starting point. And the Quran addresses the mind and calls us to think and to reflect and to see creation as a sign, but it does not only address the intellect, it addresses the human being as an entirety. And this is an important aspect. Many of us say, well, I do believe in the Quran, but it is important to understand why it is the truth from that higher reality that we call God, that we refer to as Allah. So this is very important, because you ask most Muslims, do you believe in the Quran? Yes. And very often we're confused by particular rulings. And someone tells you, well, it's in the Quran. And you're not entirely satisfied. Part of the reason is because although you give ostensible acceptance to the fact that this is from God, but you don't know why. So unconsciously, you have trouble fully embracing it. Right? So it's very important to be clear about this. Right? And we can't expand too much on the aspects of that, but there's a clear challenge in that, addressed to the people most capable. The Arabs, their civilizational pride was their eloquence. Right? It said, produce anything like this. And no one is capable. Not in its style and eloquence, and more significantly, not in its profound truth. Right? In its profound truth. And this is something that, why do we believe? Right? We have clear rational bases, but those on their own are cold and unmoving. Unlike the way the Quran conveys these truths. And one place that, one of many places where the rational proofs are presented, addressing the entirety of the human being, are verses that our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, would recite at night when he got up for his night worship, which are verses 190 to 200 of the third chapter of the Quran, Surah Ali Imran. It was a frequent practice of the Prophet ﷺ that when he got up at night, he would, and some narrations mention, he used to look to the sky in reflection and recite these verses. Truly in the createdness of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of night and day are numerous signs for those who reflect. And the verses till the end of the chapter, verses 190 to 200. And keep track of that is one of the recommendations. A third aspect, right? A third aspect. Why do we believe in the truth claim that is called Islam, right? Why do we believe in God in this way? Is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And there's rational aspects to this, that if you look at the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and this is inextricably linked to the Quran, that he could not have come with what he came with. Right? He grew up unlettered in what is really a small town called Mecca, cut off from all the great civilizations of the time, cut off from the great religious and philosophical traditions of the time. Right? But what he came with is brilliant and dazzling and inimitable. Right? Not just in its eloquence, but in its profundity and truth. But that's not it. So there's a rational aspect. There is a relationship between the Prophet, the context in which the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, came, and the revelation that he claimed is from God. That given his background and his environment and his context, this could not possibly be from him. That's one aspect. But the other aspect is that the truth claim of Islam, the truth claim of the Quran, is manifest, lived, and embodied in the person of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Right? That what does it mean to be human? It is to be Muhammad. Right? He is, sometimes bad translations bring out beautiful meanings. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says, I was only sent to perfect noble character. There's one Indo-Pak translation, and with all respect to Indo-Pakness, I celebrate both my Indianness and my Pakistaniness, though not always the latter, at least not in public. But I too suffered for a while from DSD, a Desi sense of deficiency. So with all respect, and they worked hard at translating all these books, and one shouldn't be too sophisticated for one's own benefit. But it said that Huzur, which means our revered one, was the summum bonum maximum of virtue. Now, I don't know if that's even sound Latin, but it means the complete, perfect embodiment or something like that. And you can look up summum bonum maximum. I remembered it. Memory is a curse. Okay? So, right? Which is something mentioned by those around him, that my eyes never saw anyone before nor after as beautiful or as virtuous as him. His own, the son of his own uncle, Ali ibn Abi Talib, may Allah be pleased with him, said, whoever saw him would be amazed, would be awed, and whoever came to know him would fall in love with him. Right? Why do we believe in God? Because this man is true. He is trusted. And he embodies that truth in a way that is, that cannot but make you accept it in its virtue, in its purpose, in its purposefulness, in its meaning, in its excellence, in its beauty. Right? As one of the poets said, that if beauty itself were to become embodied, and beauty were to behold the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, beauty itself would be dazzled. And it would say, لو أن كل الحسن يكمل صورة ورآه لكان مهللا ومكبرا. That if beauty itself were embodied and beauty beheld God's beloved, peace and blessings be upon him, beauty itself would say, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. Right? There's no God but God. God is truly great. Right? He is the living proof. Right? So this is very important. But again, as those of us who are Muslim, who believe, how well do you know your messenger? We don't. Right? How well do you know him? And that's very important, because it's absurd. You claim to love. You know, I was stuck at a program that I didn't want to be in Boston. I was in Boston for programs that I had agreed to be in, but I was appended to a program that I didn't want to be part of. And I was exhausted, because I've been teaching a very heavy schedule, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it's actually also, at a human level, difficult, because I had to carry on. I didn't tag it to be checked in. But it was like 6 in the morning at Pearson, and I was anticipating to be interrogated by my dear friends at U.S. Immigration. And as Canadians, I don't know why we ceded our sovereignty to the U.S. and allowed them to station, their immigration services at our airports. It's shameful. But anyways, so after I crossed U.S. Immigration, I put the bag with the checked-in bags. I got to Boston and there's no bag. So I survived 3 days of exhausting teaching on the same set of clothing, outward and inward. And that's a bit trauma-inducing, of course. 3 days later. And it was a gathering in praise of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. The person before me was supposed to speak for 20 minutes because there's 4 or 5 speakers. In 20 minutes, he tried to summarize everything that could be said about the Prophet. It was like a bunch of lists. He had all these papers. He's a very qualified person, but I don't know. Said there's 8 proofs for this, 7 for this, 6 for this. And he just went on and on and on. And he spoke like 50 minutes. I fell asleep. I woke up and they said, you have to speak. I was wondering, what do I talk about? I didn't actually want to talk about anything. So I made up a poem, right, about the Prophet. Right? It says, and just before me, there's a Moroccan group that sang, and I'll leave you with this, because we have to move to the next session, and this beautiful Moroccan group sang these beautiful poems. I said, we just heard a beautiful rendition in the West African tradition of poetry and praise. So I'm going to take inspiration from something I just made up. I didn't know what I was talking about. I said, from the Western tradition of children's poetry. And this is the great song of Jack and Jill. So I said, Jack and Jill went up the hill, and Jack fell in love. Jill came down and went away, then Jack declared his love. When asked about his beloved, he admitted, I don't know much. When asked about her beauty, he said, I didn't notice. When asked, and all these, when he declared his love, they asked him all these questions. I didn't memorize my own poem because I just made it up on the spot. But basically, he gets asked, so tell me about her, and he doesn't know anything. In the end, the questioner asked, what a strange love indeed. You claim to love her, yet you know her not. Right? And this is very strange. Right? So this is part of it. That if you want to know why we claim this truth, come to know him. Right? Come to know him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in the list of recommended readings, there's a couple of works that we will include there. We'll be putting these up tonight on the seekershub.org blog. And a fourth aspect of the truth claim is and this is directly related to the second and third, is the coherence of the guidance that it has come with. And the coherence of the guidance that it has come with. Because what is the purpose of religion? What is religion? Which is related to belief. But why? Belief is embodied in religion. But what is the purpose of religion? And if you look at it sociologically or this, that, you can, you know, you know, you know, at one level, some people treat religion like it's, I have a friend, we were nerdy environmentalists together in Spain. He remained a nerdy environmentalist, and he did a PhD on the red-tailed crab of the Orkney Islands or something. Then he was at the Galapagos Islands for a number of years, and now he's, somewhere on the West Coast. I'll protect his privacy because you could find him online. But he's a marine biologist, and he's still, But at one level, religion is just a phenomenon, just like the red-tailed crab. I don't know if it's extinct yet, of the Orkney Islands or whatever kind of crab, right? There's some weird, there's some curiosity that you study. But what is religion? What is the purpose of religion for one who believes? What is religion?
Guidance. Of getting back to the truth, or being reinforced and supported.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. I mean, that's a very practical definition. We call it a rigorous definition. It's very good. Religion is meant to be guidance, right? So you can get back to the truth, right? So the scholars of Islam like to define everything, and this is a very useful definition to know. What is religion? Religion is, and we'll strip away some of the intellectualisms from it. Religion is divinely revealed teachings, right? It's divinely revealed teachings given to humanity through prophets to enable those of intellect, those of thinking, right? Human beings, right? Practically, to choose what is good for them in this life and eternally. Right? Right? So that's the purpose. That is meant to be the purpose of religion. Right? That religion, true religion, right, is from the divine. Right? Is divine teachings sent through prophets, and prophets are the conveyors of divine guidance, and it's exemplars. And who is addressed by it? Those who would consider, those who would think, right? To those of thinking, understanding, however you want to define it. But to what end? To enable them to choose, right? Because it's all about choices. But what's the choice? To choose that which is of good for them in this life and into eternity, right? And to the next. And this is part of the argument for belief, right? For belief. Why believe in Allah? Why Allah? Because if you study it, if you consider this guidance, it is coherent. If you look in the abstract, for any system to be sound, there are certain characteristics it has. One of them is coherence. Right? Anything that the parts don't fit together, it's incoherent. It's probably not correct. Right? Things don't fit together, and this is part of the argument for Islam. And here there's an excellent series of recorded responses given by one of the great scholars of our time, Shaykh Nuh Keller, called The Coherence of Islam. They're questioned by someone who had all kinds of doubts and questions. And this is an important aspect, right? That it fits together. But it has to be seen correctly. Are there parts of Islam that seen on their own can seem very ugly? And we shouldn't feel shy about? The answer is yes. But Shaykh Nuh himself, he actually wanted to write a book about Islam. He I think turned away from the idea because other things came up. He wanted to call it the water lilies. That was his working title. Any of you know who painted the water lilies? One of the great works of Western art. My mother's an artist. I spent too much time in European museums. Eventually, I kind of started liking it because eventually, you find poignancy in the pain, right? They're stuck in all these museums all over Europe, and we're in Madrid, down the road from us. Actually, although much down the road, was El Prado, one of the great museums of Western art. So, the water lilies. Who painted the water lilies? Yeah, Monet, right? Now, the water, and I've actually seen it, there's a whole bunch of them, by the way. It's not just one. He made a number of them. It is repulsive at one level. If you look at it close up, and I actually got told off by one of the security guards because I tried to stick my face right into it because it's really repulsive. And if you look at it online, you can on its own, the parts, some of it can seem really revolting. But if you step back, it's only when you see the whole thing does it make sense. And this is an aspect that is very important. So those are 4 aspects of why, without doubt, we believe, right? Without doubt, we believe. And we can say with certitude that this is al-haqqul mubin. This is manifest truth, right? It is manifest truth. So these are just some points that I wanted to touch upon. And after the breaks, which Sadia will introduce, I actually didn't look at the schedule, so please forgive me. In the next session, do have your questions ready, because I wanted to open it up for as many of the questions, and be free, completely free to challenge any of what I said, to ask your questions. I more than welcome them. So in the next session, we'll look at some of the troubling issues that arise. I'll mention a couple as an example, but your participation in asking would be highly appreciated. And we'll also take questions from those of you who are online as well. And then we'll have a closing session, which will be a Q&A. Just as a heads up, they probably won't tell you this, but the final session, if you do want to leave, I really don't mind. But we're not welcoming you to leave, but if you want to leave, then, or actually at any time, you're welcome to come whenever you want if the door is open, and whenever you want to leave, I won't hold it against you. Alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah.